Hello, and welcome to Chatting Fit, the podcast that gives you knowledge, opinions, and interviews in the world of health, nutrition, and more. I'm Finlay Maclaren, and today I'm speaking with Stefano Tricanico. Stefano has been exploring the wildest places the world has to offer for over 20 years. To name just a few, he has guided over 200 alpine caving trips, volunteered for the British Columbia and Alberta Cave Rescue Team, and spent 3 winters instructing dog sledding and winter survival to the British Armed Forces in the Canadian Rockies. Cool, so thanks for joining me, Stefano.
My pleasure for me.
Cool. So can you just, I gave a little bit of an intro there, but can you just tell me a bit about your background, where you grew up, why you started traveling, and how you got to, where you are now?
Well, okay, that's 45 years and 2 minutes, but let me try. I grew up in a small town just south of Johannesburg, in South Africa, and spent the first 23 years of my life there, trying to find my way. And I was straight into, by the time I had left, I'd already done a dozen different jobs, from working in the largest steel factory in the Southern Hemisphere at the time to working as armed response officer, running around in the middle of the night by myself, armed, responding to alarms and distress calls. And this was all, in the late 90s when things were pretty hairy over there. And then things changed politically quite dramatically. And for my generation coming up, just heading into what would have been university age, affirmative action was brought in South Africa, which is pretty much 180 reversal of racist doctrine, so to speak. I mean, I was just wrong age, wrong color, wrong place at the time, so I had to choose whether to struggle through that or actually pack up and run. And fortunately, my parents were Italians and I had an Italian passport, and I took the opportunity and I headed to the UK, and I worked my way up from a dishwasher in a pub in the West End of London, all the way through to sous chef. And in the meantime, I was traveling about 4 to 6 months a year doing expeditions to the Himalayas and Nepal and Pakistan.
Wow.
Patagonia. That I was paying for it by cooking. And then eventually I got tired of the city and I moved up to Scotland onto the Isle of Skye for 6 years, which was probably the most wonderful 6 years of my life.
That's a good contrast.
Yes, it was. It was more home than any place has ever been. We were anonymous up there for years. I worked as a handyman in this country house hotel on the North End.
Wow.
And I started my guiding. We started a little walking business and started taking wildlife watching tours and hill walking. And then things changed up there. They're starting to get bought out by a lot of people with money from the south, and it was starting to get expensive to live. So we decided, well, it's either go to New Zealand or Canada were the two choices, and just the vastness and the size of Canada drew me immediately. And I came out here, and as soon as I arrived, I dived into the caving scene, and I worked as a cave guide in the summertime and a dog sled guide in the wintertime. We actually used to take out British Army troops that are stationed here in Medicine Hat out onto the lakes for 4-day-long adventure training courses, which was pretty amazing. Yeah, that went on for about 3 years. And then I turned 40, and I wanted to draw a line. I wanted something dramatically to change. I was getting to the age where I'm getting tired of lugging huge backpacks up, forcing against gravity up a mountain.
Yeah.
And I decided to go to sea instead and get my captain's license, my sailing captain's license. And I went to South Africa and spent 5 months learning to sail, and then sailing across the Atlantic to Brazil as part of my certification. And that was a turning point. And then I started doing quite a bit of volunteering work at sea for Sea Shepherd Conservation Society, west coast of Africa, Mexico. And one night in the middle of the night, I was just searching around online, and I happened to get see an email for someone working in the expedition cruise industry in Antarctica and the Arctic. And I got onto them, and within half an hour, I had been given a job working in Antarctica as a boat driver, a Zodiac driver and guide. And that was 2 years ago.
Wow.
Before everything got shut down, but I had a good few seasons up north and down south. I mean, they're very different. Antarctica is pretty much wildlife tours and sightseeing, icebergs. You're pretty much basing yourself out of a Zodiac the whole time. Up north, we have different considerations. Polar bears, the wildlife is more of a factor in the north. And so that's quick and dirty.
Yeah. I mean, that is a quick rundown, but a shitload in there. Like, yes. I mean, you've done, like, I guess, kind of stints where, I mean, it sounds like you get either bored easily or you're just constantly looking for adrenaline.
I'm not a big fan of adrenaline, actually. I don't like it. My body doesn't deal with it very well. I get very, very shaky. Some people, I think it's an acclimatization thing, perhaps, to adrenaline. You once you become used to it, the physical aspect of it smooths out. You might still feel anxious and jittery and high inside, but your body's under control. I don't like it because it makes me jittery. And when I climb, I like the slow, controlled movements. I don't like things that are, like, I tried whitewater kayaking. When I was in Nepal, I did a 4-day whitewater kayaking clinic, and I didn't like it. It didn't take. I didn't like the fact that I couldn't stop and think about a problem before approaching it. It's just coming at you constantly. Yeah. And you just have to, it's reactionary. It's not, and it just didn't sit well with me. I like to throw myself at big challenges, and mountaineering is one of those, one step at a time. It just comes at you and you just deal with it as it's coming. And that's more my type of thing. But it's a childhood thing. I think we moved around a lot, when I was a kid, and we moved to Italy and then back again. And apparently I traveled Europe in a stroller when my parents were on honeymoon. So I never really had a sense of home. I just felt perhaps trapped by the culture that I'd grown up in. My schooling was really old school. You could have said it was probably schooling the same as it was in England in the 50s and 60s, where they flogged everything into you. Blazers, ties, shiny shoes, long pants, schoolboy haircuts, one word out of line and you get the rod or the cricket bat or the paddle or anything they could get their hands on. So that kind of certainly pushed me to get out there. But I think the tipping point was my friend's mom. I remember we were sitting across the table one day, and I was just daydreaming about traveling or going somewhere. And she just leaned over and looked straight at me, and she said, "Just do it. Just go and do it." And at that point, nobody had ever said anything like that to me. Not even my vocational guidance teacher in high school. We used to have a subject, an hour a week, where it's dedicated to that. And, you just end up getting funneled into whatever is the required, market need for a skill. But nobody ever said, you know what, just dream it and do it. That wasn't part of our education. Dream big, whatever you can dream is a reality. That came later on, and it was probably 20, 30 years away from people. I was still getting flogged when I was 16 in the last year of high school. That was in 93, I think they stopped flogging in 95 or something. It was quite recent.
That's so recent
compared to most countries. Yes.
That's like modern era stuff. That's like nearly 2000s. You're like, what?
Yeah, you can knock it back 20, 30 years because of where we were. I mean, it was a farm communities, very, very religious, and you're immigrants in Africa. You're a tiny minority of people, and I was, it's a complicated situation, the whole story there, because it's not just a matter of white and black. Is in amongst the white communities, there was a massive divisions, because my parents were Italian, so you have these little insular kind of expat communities, and they all stick together. And then right down the middle, the white community is divided between the immigrants and first generations and the ones who have been there for 3 or 4 generations who considered themselves real South Africans, for instance. The predominantly Afrikaans speakers. So we never mixed at school. School events were separate. Whenever we did mix at school events, you can guarantee it was just a bunch of fighting going on, So there was a lot of division, and I needed to get out of there. There was just no way out. I couldn't see a way for myself to survive in an environment like that. And it was the best move I ever made.
Yeah. That sounds pretty reasonable. I mean, it's like you've got all of the push factors to get out and all of the pull factors of great stuff you can go and do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, out of all those areas, I mean, you went to Scotland, where you were in London, Scotland, or Skye, out caving, you went to sea across the Atlantic, came back up to Canada. So out of any of those areas, I mean, and any of those times, does any stand out as kind of like your most memorable area, or you're where you would say, if you could go back to a time in your life, where you'd go?
Well, I'll give Canada a mention because it is one of the most incredible countries on the planet. I mean, just British Columbia alone, the size of it. And if you keep going, you hit the Yukon. Having been to the Himalayas and Patagonia and the Arctic and Antarctic and around, I tried to travel to the most remote areas, untouched areas I could find. That was my criteria for travel. I have to say that Canada, by hands down, the air, the water, the wilderness, the scenery, the remoteness, I mean, there's nothing quite like it, and I'm still just scratching the surface, even though I've been here for 14 years. I mean, now I have a bit more incentive to stay because they're making it really hard to travel. Or to come back. You can travel, but to come back will be difficult. So I'll be seeing more of it, but I'd say my most memorable trip was we did a circumambulation of the Himalayas back in about 15 years ago, where it took us about 8 months. It was myself and my partner Vanya at the time. We started in northern India and we picked out obscure remote glaciers that nobody was really traveling up because it was off the beaten path, and we did a bit of a combination of exploratory tracks in certain areas, and then we move on and track our way around. And we pretty much went from India into Pakistan, over Kunjurap Pass into Tibet, and spent 6 weeks hitchhiking across Tibet, and I went to North Face Everest Base Camp, and we went to Camp 2, which is the highest non-technical track in the world. And at the time, there was only 2 of us there. It was late season. Everyone had gone. So that was really one of the most surreal experiences I've had. It feels like a dream just thinking about it today. I mean, if I didn't have the photos, I would wonder if it was actually a dream or not. Yeah. And we ended up in Nepal and back to India, and it covered about 10,000 kilometers in 8 months.
Jesus. And what were you trekking that, or were you how are you getting around?
Trekking the vast majority of the time was trekking. We would be up on the glaciers for weeks at a time, and then we would just transport by whatever means, whether you're sitting in the back of a truck, on the roof of a bus or whatever, and you go to the next area. Tibet was difficult because there's just such little infrastructure and so little traffic out there that we kind of had to stay close to the roads and hitchhiking and take whatever transport we could. It's that's a whole story in itself. That it's probably one of the most challenging sections of trip I've ever done was the 6 weeks in Tibet.
Yeah,
really.
Why? Because
a cultural level, I think. The the types of Chinese that were sent out into the west part of Tibet, into Xinjiang and around Kashgar, were Han Chinese, very hard-working business type, very nationalistic type Chinese. And they didn't like foreigners being there at all. They wouldn't talk to us. In fact, they chased us, regularly chased us out of eating establishments or
Really?
places to live. They really didn't want us around at all. The Tibetans didn't talk to us because they were afraid. The Chinese looked down on us almost to the point of where you feel like you're less than an animal. Dogs get more attention than you do out there.
Yeah.
And most people don't get that experience because most people who go to Tibet do a Lhasa to Kathmandu trip, which is very, very manicured, controlled interactions. You know, it's a quick 100-kilometer-an-hour trip.
Yeah.
That takes about a week. And if you ask those people what's your experience of Tibet, it'll be very, very different to actually being out there independently for a while. So when I came out of there, I was traumatized. I think it's the first time in my life that I was traumatized by something. It took me months to get over the way we were treated. For 6 weeks. When I walked across the border into Nepal and I walked over the bridge, we had been treated like non-entities for 6 weeks. And the first person we came across on the Nepali side came over and said, "Hey, how are you, my friend? Come sit down, have some tea. Where are you from? Where have you been?" You know, I was in shock. I started crying. It was like the first genuine human sentiment towards me and my partner in 6 weeks. You know, we sat on a street corner for 2 whole days in this town, and people just carried on around us like we weren't even there. Like we were just, they would open their stores behind us, sit there all day and close their stores and barely even look at you. I mean, it was as far as a human experience, I've never been, after 23 years in Africa even, never felt that way.
Yeah. That's crazy. And you said they would chase you out of places. Like, would they have got violent and attacked you, or like what was the end game there? They just didn't want you around.
Yeah, you'd go to walk into a noodle place and they just come straight at you and say, "No, out." We got kicked out of a hotel in the middle of the night when we were sleeping once.
Fuck.
We were on this hellish bus ride. This thing's catalytic converter underneath kept exploding every half an hour and filling the cab with these noxious fumes in the middle of the night.
Nice.
And then eventually we got to this hotel about dinner time. They reluctantly, because we were part of the entourage, they reluctantly let everyone in to eat. And the place was empty. There was this horrid little town. The towns in Tibet are traditional towns, and then you get the Chinese sector, which is like a noodle shop, a brothel, and a liquor store. And out in the street outside the liquor store, there's about a 30-foot pile of empty beer bottles. And they scream out communist propaganda and music first thing in the morning at 5 o'clock on tannoys. It's so bizarre. But I mean, they woke us up in the middle of the night after having us, letting us stay there, because a bus of Chinese tourists arrived in the middle of the night. So they went room to room, woke everyone up, made us pack our bags, and kicked us out in the middle of the night.
Fuck.
So they immediately...
And the Chinese didn't want to be in there with you guys, or?
Well, no, they wanted to accommodate the Chinese, and they thought very little of us, thought very little of coming to wake us up and kick us out, because, you're not being looked at on the same level.
Yeah.
You're not being given the same respect as anybody else. You're not getting any respect at all. You kick someone out at 2 in the morning and force them out into the middle of the Tibetan plateau, But, yeah, it was unexpected and incredibly challenging and eye-opening to see what's actually going on out there for myself.
That sounds pretty intense. I mean, getting kicked out of hotels aside, I mean, you said you spent a fair bit of time in the glaciers, so presumably that's pretty cold. Is that sort of literally like a winter climate, or what is that like, and trekking through that?
Well, high altitude, you generally lose about 1 degree Celsius for every 100 meters you climb. So almost in any environment, the higher you go, the colder it gets, and eventually you'll get to the ice line. But we spent months at a time at high altitude, and we at one point did the longest glacial traverse, I think, outside of the poles, which is the Biafo-Hispar-Baltoro traverse in winter conditions, because pretty much the Baltoro Glacier is the one that leads to K2 base camp.
Okay.
And it's so large you can see it from space. And you have to kind of go one way and can come back again, and then you link up two other glaciers, which is the Biafo-Hispar. And that turns into one of the longest glacial traverses you can do outside of the polar regions. And, Chile has got some long glacial traverses in Patagonia. But we were out there end of season, usually beginning of winter. Not a soul around. The only time we went through Pakistan in the summertime in full trekking season was when we went all the way around. We didn't have the luxury of being everywhere at the end of season, and we had to make sure we could get over Kunjarab and out of Tibet before the winter came.
Yeah.
So there's the environment up there. What I love about it is it gives you nothing. It gives you nothing, only water. That's all you get from it. It's rock, ice, and sky, and there's very little room for error. If you compare it, let's say, to a rainforest, which is probably my least favorite environment because it's so oppressive, constantly oppressive in every possible way, but it gives you everything you need. There's all sorts of kinds of foods and medications and ways of obtaining clean drinking water. In the mountains, it is what it is, and that's it. Maybe you're lucky you got some running water. End of season, that tends to be a problem. So you learn to be as utterly self-reliant as you can, because there's no forgiveness up there. And fortunately, I'm convinced I'm not prone to flowery thoughts about guardian angels, but I'm convinced that something or someone is looking after me, because I should have been dead many, many times. Just small things. And I've never even sustained as much as a scratch in all my years, in all the stuff I've done. Never broken a bone. Or when I was working as an armed response officer, I put a gate spike through my lower leg. That's the worst injury I ever had. But it's I think if you put yourself out there and you approach it in a competent manner without being reckless or without getting too cocky with the mountains, I think you'll do well. But when you start going out there and you're there to conquer things, and you're there, with this ego trip going, which happens a lot in people who risk their lives to stand on the top of a mountain are trying to prove something to themselves at enormous risk. And I'm not much of in the Himalayas, I don't mess around with the summits too much, because I don't want to spend a month going up and down the same slope, back and forth from one camp to the next, just to go and stand on the summit. I would rather spend those 4 weeks traversing lots of ground and discovering beautiful valleys and villages, but you're still spending a significant time up high. But it's not some torture fest like most summit attempts are.
Well, it's an arbitrary, box ticking exercise, isn't it? It's like, got to the top of Everest, or it's great. It's an amazing achievement, but that's what it's about. It's about just that one small box tick, or big box tick.
Sure. I mean, look, and you can do all of the stuff we did. Well, all of it, a lot of it, you can do with guides and local agencies. And the thing is, for me, it was, can I do it on my own? And I did everything. I mean, we were on Sky prior. This was quite a while back, so I wasn't too internet savvy. It was all fairly normal. I was buying gear out of catalogs through the mail and receiving it in big boxes and arranging everything myself. And when I got there, I would go into the market, buy all the food, carry it all to my hotel room by myself, not speaking a word of Urdu or whatever or Hindi. But you just get on with it, and that's how you test yourself through the whole process. It's not just here I arrive, I get whisked off and start walking, and everything is prepared for me when I get to base camp. There's a tent, with a little welcome mat outside it. And the guy's going to come wake me up in the morning with a cup of tea. It's not the type of experience that I wanted. I never went on a trip like that. And it's always about, can I do it on my own? And what will the result be? And so far, it's, the 10 years that I spent intensely in that area really made my entire life worth it, so to speak, in a manner of speaking. If I was to go tomorrow, I would be quite content that I felt like I've lived multiple lifetimes at this point, Yeah. I'm starting to lose track myself.
It seems like you've covered a fair bit of ground, to be honest.
Yeah.
But you were saying, the kind of the winter environment, or like the glacier environment, or in the mountains, it gives you nothing. So like, what are you doing for food up there, and like how much preparation goes into right, I'm going to be trekking in the mountains for like a week or a month, or like, how do you even begin to start planning that?
Well, the food is always a compromise. I mean, now it's a little bit better, perhaps, you get these freeze-dried, well thought out expedition food. But generally, you're buying what you can get there at the last towns or the last city you're in, and it's imported. And it tends to be imported pre-processed dried food, or you end up carrying cans, which nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to carry hydrated food if you can avoid it. And I found the most that we could carry at high altitude would be about 2 weeks worth of food and fuel in our own backpacks. But because some of these trips went into up to 6 weeks long, the Baltoro Biafra Hispa trip was 6 weeks long, 38 days or something, almost 6 weeks. So we had to drop a cache, and I had to have porters with me, because there's just no way to pull something like that off otherwise. So, and it's a tricky balancing act, because the more porters you have, then the more porters you need to carry food and fuel for them. And they're using these big, inefficient kerosene stoves that are built quite rough, and they just burn through. I mean, I could last an entire week on 1 liter of fuel, cooking 3 times a day, and they would burn through 25 liters in these big, massive stoves. But I mean, so you got to take all that into account, and you're managing every liter of fuel every day. You're counting it, because there's no support up there. There's a few army bases which we stopped in and visited, because the guys who man the bases are usually from the local villages, so they know each other, and usually they go and spend the night there and hang out with their buddies, and then we just carry on. But generally, that's my preferred environment, because it's devoid of people. If you put yourself in the right place at the right time, you can have this stark, raw mountain experience without having to, you go hill walking in Scotland, for instance. You can't walk 30 seconds without having to be polite and greet someone. Or, everyone is nice and polite and in a good mood. But that's not the reason some people don't go out there you're in a zone. For me, it's like this experience. After about a week or two, I click into a different way of being. You just forget your old life, and you forget everything about it, and you're just in this bubble of existence. And that's how I like to experience these things. It's a really intense connection with what's going on. And my photography helped me a lot in maintain that connection, because it got me up out of bed first thing in the morning in the dark, and it gets me back in bed really late at night, and it helped me to focus my attention on small details. It really helped nurture an intense relationship with the natural world. I have to grant that to the photographic process, because it requires that level of attention and watching every minute of the light and how it changes, which you normally wouldn't do. Normally, you just sit back and take more of a relaxed approach as how you perceive a situation, so to speak. You're not really watching it. You're not really listening. But if you have I found for me, photography gave me just that extra that I needed to stay focused on the situation. And over the years, I realized how helpful that was in nurturing this, not only my understanding of nature and how things work, and because you're starting to look at all the little details. And it's incredible how much, when you have such little to look at, yes, you're in you're surrounded by incredible mountains and peaks, but really at your feet you've got nothing but fragments of ice and rock. But and it doesn't look like much until you start to look closely, and it's almost like fractal. The closer you look, the more intricate it becomes. Yeah. That's that kept me going for sure.
I mean, that sounds pretty intense. I mean, so that must have been a kind of a natural swing over from once you started doing all these expeditions. It's like then giving it more of a purpose as well to it.
Yes, I think to have a purpose is very, very important. I think you at least have to voice it regardless of whether it's some grand sounding purpose. Look, my purpose for travel in the beginning was, amongst all the things we've already talked about and the pulls and the pushes, was I had some serious questions. I started what most people go through in their midlife crisis. I started when I was a teenager for some reason. Well, I know the reason. It started when I was 15. We came home one Christmas and I unlocked the door. It was at night and the hallway door was kicked in and we'd realized we'd just been robbed. And my dad was not a keep the savings in the bank kind of guy. He had his entire life's savings and works in the safe. And we walked in there and the safe was standing wide open, completely empty. First time I saw my dad cry. Oh, and I thought, hang on a minute. And then the insurance companies didn't pay out because the investigating officer got shot investigating another case and he didn't present his findings on time. So they threw the whole thing out. And this affected me deeply. And, you know, I was born and raised Catholic, so I'd gone to church and done my confirmation, and I was already having questions about that. And I thought, hang, the whole situation as they explained it at school and as they explain it in church and everyone seems to think it is, doesn't make sense to me. I see really, really good people getting screwed over constantly and really, really bad people getting away with it. Our neighbors robbed us. Our own neighbors, he was a plumber. He even left the pickaxes, which he had spray painted pink handles just so that his own gear wouldn't get stolen. He'd left that behind in the house and then they packed up and moved out the very next day. We were robbed by our neighbors. I mean, it's shocking. It's just, I mean, I have to laugh about it now, but it upset me terribly when I was a kid because I saw my parents, they were already struggling as it was, and it made me angry. It made me a very, very angry young kid.
I'm not
surprised.
I had some
serious questions about the world. And part of the reason why I traveled is I wanted answers. That's why I went to India. That's why I went to that part of the world, because the mountains aren't just like they are in North America, some big hump of rock that you conquer or you mine or something. The mountains there are the abode of the gods. Some of them are untouchable. You can't summit them. It's sacred. There's a bit more of a deeper connection. I just wanted some answers. I mean, what is this all about? It doesn't seem to make sense the way we're growing up in South Africa and the way everything we know. It just doesn't work. Whatever you're telling me is not making sense to me. And when I ask questions, it just creates more of a problem because there aren't any answers. It's just shut up and do as you're told the whole way through. And it's like, that's not an answer. That's not intellectually satisfying at all.
Yeah.
So I went on this semi kind of quest to sort myself out and to get answers for myself because I thought, you know, I have to know. I'm just one of those people who I like to understand things as best I can. I like to look into something interests me. I look into it almost obsessively from as many angles as possible so I can understand it. Not because I feel the need to adopt a more worthy belief or some kind of, you know, highbrow belief as you grow older. It's just more about constantly checking myself and making sure that I'm not just living my life believing something that I've picked up along the way unquestioningly. And that experience fortunately taught me very early on to make up your own mind, question, have a look, do your research. There's plenty of intelligent people out there, and that's what I was searching for because I didn't find it around me.
No.
My parents were struggling. The teachers at school beat us. In the streets, you're just kids playing around marbles and cards. It was old school. You're riding your bikes. There's no video games or any of that nonsense anyway. So we grew up playing in the streets, coming home muddy and dirty, and which was a blessing. In the end, it took me many years to process that whole childhood, and I resented it for a long, long time. I thought, why, of all the places, once I'd seen the world, I thought, why did my parents choose there? But it ultimately it served a greater purpose for me in the long run. All those floggings at school, as much as I hated them at the time and as much as I resented them for so many years, I saw the difference of those who weren't and those who were. And it made me respectful. It made me think before I acted, because there were actual consequences. Now you can threaten all the kids all you want. There's no consequences, real consequences. What are you going to do? Take the PlayStation away? Or you get a timeout, like a 2-minute timeout or something. I mean, it's you may as well not do anything. You're just teaching your kids that they can get away with anything. But there was actual consequences for us, and it made me a respectful, thoughtful person. It also made me a little bit resentful of authority, but that's come back a little bit then, because they went overboard. It wasn't just a normal teenage thing. They really did degrade us. But
I mean, it sounds like that would give. I mean, if anything's going to kind of breed a resentment in you, it's similar to things to that. But from bring it back a little bit to the guiding and stuff. Like, you're taking people and keeping that mindset that you're just talking about, like knowing that there's like you've had that experience with knowing consequences, like true consequences. Like, if you're taking people out into extreme environments, guiding them around in these really harsh, unforgiving environments, and they don't have that mindset, if they're from an environment like lived in a city, they're just looking for this, great experience. How do you make sure that you're going with the right people, and how do you get across to them like they're not fucking around here?
Well, I wouldn't go onto a serious expedition with a bunch of unknowns, that's for sure. There would be probably multiple warm-up trips to make sure that everyone, if they don't have the skills, then they would have to learn at least the basic skills to become a team member. Because look, expeditions are not really guided situations. When I'm talking polar guiding, most of the time it's really, really low risk, easy physical activity. It doesn't take much. The type of folks that are coming on expedition cruises are not going down there for expeditions. But speaking from an expedition standpoint, which is the more serious undertaking and the one that will bring you the most pleasure in the end, because you're actually working as a team. Everyone has their place. And I'm currently working with a few people in Canada who I want to build up to something big like that. They quite wealthy individuals. They've achieved in a business sense, they've already achieved everything. It's millions on top of millions. I mean, how much pleasure can you get about just cranking out the money? They've got everything they need. They really want to get into something where they can keep challenging themselves. They are entrepreneurs anyway, and they're those type of people that like challenges. I work with them. We go on smaller trips, and we slowly build up the skills. If you want to, let's say you want to climb Everest, that might be a 5-year project, really. If you're from the city and that's not your thing, and now you've decided this year made you think about life a little bit and what's important and what isn't, and I want to go and say tag Everest, and you're going to have to build up with that. You're going to have to probably, at very least, do a good mountaineering course to get something, structured. And then you have to go on some build-up mountaineering trips, building your skills and your up as you go along. And you have to get some kind of first aid qualification, because everyone is responsible for everybody else. You can't have one person because if something happens to the person who's responsible for your first aid or your medical emergencies, if something happens to them, then everybody else needs to be in a similar position to be able to take care of them. So it's a huge responsibility in an expedition, as opposed to a guided situation where your guest is the only responsibility is for them to follow instructions as best they possibly can.
Yeah.
When it's time, and to have fun. But if you're an expedition, of course those things are having fun and is all part of it. But ultimately, you have a responsibility. You have a certain level of competence that you're expected to perform at. Otherwise, the team as a whole doesn't move as efficiently and as safely as it can through the terrain, depending on what it is that you're attempting. So it's a long process of building it up, and it's more of a mental thing. And it's, it's not some torturous, like training for a triathlon or something where you're up grinding 10K a day and, and doing visualization exercises for when you get into that marathon and you run out of juice and you have to just power yourself through with your mind. It's not. Expeditions are one day at a time, and you're gonna get. Your mind is the mind game is definitely probably the one that'll shut you down the quickest if you're not careful, unless you have a physical injury of some sort. But I think it's more of a mental thing, and it starts with wanting to do it. Is knowing why you're doing it and really wanting to do it. And how I get down to the bottom of what people want to do is I don't say, what do you fancy doing? What would make you happy? Or what would you consider fun or adventurous? You're going to get superficial answers if you ask that, and you're going to have to still do some digging to get down to what people really want. So my technique is I say, look, if tomorrow you went to the doctor for a regular medical checkup and you came back and they called you in the next day and said, listen, my friend, we found something unexpected and you've got a couple of years, maybe three years left while your body is still able to do what it does. So you might want to reconsider what you're going to do with the rest of your time. So if you visualize yourself in that position, if you say, look, and you actually feel it, it's not a game. If you're going to undertake an expedition, you're taking on some serious risk. So it's good to know why you're going out there, to have that clear in your head instead of getting out there and finding yourself asking, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why am I away from my family in the middle of nowhere, freezing my ass off, eating out of a bag, shitting in a bag? It's just, it's just, you have to know why. And homesickness has killed so many expeditions. I can't tell you, not any ones I've been involved in, but it's a pitiful state that people are unprepared to handle. Even the hard ones will find themselves whimpering and crying for home and your warm bed and, and the familiar food and familiar faces. But that's where the mental preparation comes in. And that's why having a mission and a goal is important, so that in those low moments, you can remind yourself of that. And if you think about it in the terms of, well, here's my life. I've got 2-3 years left, just to add some urgency onto the matter. And you think, what would I actually do if I had 2 years left with my life or 3 years left with my life? I don't think you would go back to your mundane job or go back to school and finish your degree, or, I think you dig down a little deeper and you think, well, okay, this is my one chance to satisfy my actual dreams, what I've always wanted to do. And the only way you reach that is by putting a little bit of a serious tone onto it, because it is a serious undertaking. And if you get your goal or your mission right, it'll pull you through everything in the worst times. But if you're there for some frivolous reason, you're not going to last very long, I don't think. You're going to have to talk yourself through every moment, and you're going to end up dragging everybody else down too, because you won't be able to manage your own state properly. And it happens. Everyone has those times, but it's not something that you can go and find out that that's the way it works when you're in the middle of some ice-capped traverse or some incredibly committing situation.
Probably the worst time to leave it to yes, try and come up with the reasoning.
Yeah. And there's a lot of these types now around the celebrity expedition people. They're popping up everywhere now. I don't even know who these guys are half the time, and they just end up getting a lot of sponsorship and going, and that's, but it's become a bit of a thing. It's become popular again now. Expeditioning was super popular back the old days of the Arctic expeditions. And then it became like a specialist, a specialist thing where, only the best of the best get together and they go and try some crazy stuff. But now it seems expedition as the word is used a lot looser in the circles these days. And, even for instance, a 5-star cruise ship going into Antarctica has got expedition written all over the thing.
Yeah.
And it's about as far from an expedition as you could possibly get in the real sense of the word. You're in a floating hotel 5 minutes away, never further than 5 minutes by boat from the ship.
Yeah.
It's hardly an expedition, but so in the grand sense of the word expedition, in the old school sense, not too many of those around really anymore.
No.
But I've got some big plans coming up for myself. This year's made me think a bit, so I'm throwing myself at something huge involving thousands of kilometers.
What's in the pipeline?
I want to do a dog sled traverse of Canada, south to north, running from the US border, the north and the Canadian southern border to the US.
Yeah.
All the way up to Tuktoyaktuk in the Arctic Ocean. It's about 3,000 odd kilometers, depending on how much wangling you do to get there. But it's huge. It's probably the longest dog sled run ever done. No, I'm planning it with a friend of mine. She lives up in Svalbard, up in Spitsbergen, and she's a dog sled guide. And similarly, she's already been to the North Pole with dogs on a guided trip. She was the guide, but and we were stuck on a ship together for a month down after coming back in April there they wouldn't let us off in Cape Town. We were supposed to fly back home, and we ended up sailing around in the Atlantic waiting to hear. Yeah. And this thing came up, and we talked about it a bit, and I really want to do it because it's really challenging. It's not some frivolous little attempt at getting recognition or something. It's huge. It could be definitely it could break you at any point. It's one of those that there's not going to be smooth sailing. The dogs could give up on you. All sorts of things could happen.
How long would that take?
Oh, anything from a month to 60 days, I think. A month to 2 months, depending on the conditions, really. If you're plowing every day, you could only do 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers in a day, depending on the conditions. Or if you have perfect conditions, you could do 100.
Would you do? Is it winter time you'd go or summer?
Oh no, full winter conditions. We would need to right in the middle of the season to avoid. The worst thing that could happen is no snow.
Okay.
As you get out on the dry trail. Well, the dogs are okay. It's a little bit hard for them because the mostly ends up being gravel or really frozen ground. It's the sled that the runners take a beating and you just destroy your sled. But it's part of the process. We can plan around that. And I have already thought about it, but it's really, we have to hit the sweet spot in winter when the snow's on the ground, and it's going to be hard, really hard. That's for sure. It's not something. Those are very, very long days, and those dogs come first thing in the morning, all day long. They're your main priority because without them, you're going nowhere. So yes, very, very intense.
Food-wise for that, because you're presumably having to bring all the food for the dogs as well. So, I mean, how are you prepping for that?
Well, we will probably set up caches. I'm thinking of running it the other way around, but it'll depend on food caches along the way.
Food caches being like little food deposits along the way.
Yeah. So at where the trail perhaps comes close to a road, we would have either a support vehicle. Either we would do the drive before and go and lay out the caches before, and then make sure everything is good and we're allowed to actually travel through and we have clear passage, and then come back and then start the expedition and deal with the conditions as we find them when we go.
Yeah.
But it's going to be, something that big and something that difficult. You really have to take one day at a time. You can't even think about the amount of effort it's going to take to pull off, especially if it drags on to 60 days. Yeah. But certainly it's a one day at a time. Let's get through today. Well, let's get through the next hour, and that's how you plod on. Slow and steady, and you'll get there. And it's not a race. When we're not trying to break a record because nobody's done it before. So, and it's not just about that. It's just about, it's epic whether someone's done it before or not. Like my around the Himalayas, I didn't know if anyone had tried that before. And then years later, right here in Banff, which is the next town over, I watched a presentation of a guy and his wife who did it in the 70s, the exact same trip. They wrote a book about it and everything. So, it's great. You get the odd, the odd ones here and there. There's no precedent for this thing, really. You just know how to run the dogs for a long period of time, and as long as you look after your gear and the dogs and yourself, you'll get there eventually.
Yeah. It's pretty insane. I mean, you're actually making me reevaluate my whole life at the moment.
I get that a lot. Mostly, I scare the shit out of people.
Yeah, I think it's a combination at the moment. I'm firstly thinking like, wow, I've done fuck all with my life, and secondly, I'm like, this guy's a fucking crazy.
Right. Well, I try to maintain my sanity and not do things because I have some kind of death wish. Again, that's where you got to be careful with the adrenaline sports. They generally involve throwing yourself off something and hoping that something else opens and stops you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was thinking about doing another skydive the other day, but I think all the restrictions put a kibosh on that. But
that's great fun. I would love to do so much more of that.
Oh, I mean, like I've done it once before in Argentina. But again, this is like, there's so many little factors. I mean, you've taken an incredible path in life where you've gone, fuck the 9 to 5 or fuck the regular stuff that generally holds most people in place, and you've broken the barrier from between where people's fantasy normally is and reality. And a lot of people never really break that barrier above and beyond maybe a week away somewhere or, a little dipping your toe in the water. And what's really sad is a lot of people will get to, 50 or older, and they've never experienced a lot of these things. And perhaps at that stage, they've let their health get to a state where it's not really possible for them to take it to the extreme anymore. So that's the sad thing that we see in so many people is, they lose their fitness, they lose their health, and they lose their mindset to take on challenges for whatever the reason may be. And it may just be proving it to yourself. And, you've mentioned the dangers there where if it's just ticking a box. But that, I think, is the saddest bit, is people not challenging themselves and taking themselves to that point where they're actually having to put themselves in a bit of a hole and say, right, we've got to grit my teeth and get through this and remember the reason why I'm doing it. And people will put themselves on the back foot and they grit their teeth through a job that they hate for the sake of it, and they're putting themselves in the same hole, and the reasons may be the same. They may be supporting a family, or life situation and circumstances may have not given them the opportunity. But it's incredibly kind of inspiring to hear someone who's just said fuck it, and just actively at all these points, moving from London to Skye, and then Skye, and then going to do caving, and then going to sea and working with Sea Shepherd and everything in between, and taking those opportunities and taking those leaps of faith almost to just, change your situation and leap without any fear of what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be ready for it. Opportunities come for everyone. But if you're not ready for it and you're not prepped for it, you won't even see it. It'll come and go without you even noticing it. And that's the thing. You have to be ready to take it. Very rarely are opportunities convenient. Never have I actually found them to be convenient. They don't arrive when you have the time and the money, and they just land on your lap and you either go or you don't. There's no hesitating. And if you hesitate, you could lose it because you're not the only one in line for these opportunities. There's other people and you just have to take it and forget about the excuses, because ultimately you can, when it's too late, not all the excuses in the world or all the money in the world is going to buy you back 1 second of your life. You won't be able to rewind any of it and go back. And I mean, I heard plenty of that. And it's also one of the many reasons why I left is I got sick and tired of these old folks telling me, oh, I wish I was your age. Oh, if I was 20 years younger, what I would be doing right now. And you just keep hearing this stuff. And it's like, well, why then is everyone following the same line as you do? Go get an education, come out, get a job, have a family, and get spat out the other side. all broken and defeated.
Yeah.
And then you're going to try and live a life of adventure. And some people pull it off if you can still salvage that and you still have the physical capacity. But ultimately, it's all a compromise, of course. I've had to compromise whether I wanted it to or not. Fortunately, I never had much of the urge or the drive to have a family. But I sacrifice friends even. My friends are scattered all over the world. I rarely see my good friends, ever, if ever. We run into each other. We'll work together in a boat in Antarctica or on a ship in Antarctica, and then the next time I'll see them, I'll run into them in a supermarket in Svalbard somewhere, just like that, on the opposite end of the world randomly. That's how I meet my friends, and most other folks, I'm just coming and going in between, and very few people can relate to my life. It's fine. We sit and chat about day-to-day things, but the moment we start chatting about, well, what do you do for a living? I just get an open mouth, and people are like, okay, I don't even know how to respond to that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So I don't talk about my life or myself a lot. I have my photography website, and people can kind of get a hint of what it's like from my photos, but I very rarely sit down and tell the story, even though I constantly get told, you should write a book. You should definitely write a book. I would be super interested in reading it. I'm like, yeah, okay. I've heard it enough now that maybe at some point, but I'm still, it's a constant work in progress, and there's
more chapters to add at the moment.
I'm not there yet. I'm not going to write my memoirs at 17 like Justin Bieber or something. If you live a bloody life first.
Oh, I don't know. I'd sit back, write some memoirs, crank in the cash, and then just disappear off into the sunset.
Yeah, there you go. That's one way. I'll give it a think.
Yeah. Fantastic. Right, Stefano, I think that's a good place to kind of wind things up, but thank you so much for taking the time. You mentioned your photography and stuff, and I know your website. So where can people find you if they're interested to find out a bit more about you?
Well, my website with a bit of my personal details and photos from trips is at www.adventuretravel.world. Everything about me is there, and my contact details are there if anyone wants to get a hold of me for future trips. As soon as things start to become reasonable, we're definitely going to have some stuff going in Canada, in northern Canada, for some select individuals who really want to dedicate the time and the effort to do it properly, in the same vein as I like to do my trips, and not so much guided, more as a team effort to go and explore our own country. So that would be nice.
Amazing.
Connect with a few of those folks.
100%. Well, I'll see it. I'll put the word out. But thanks again, and I'm looking forward to reading that book when it comes out.
Thank you for your time and for the interest. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Stefano.